morning, good afternoon, good evening to anybody who joins us today for the final and third day of the Asia Finance Forum hosted by the Asian Development Bank. And our conference is titled Reinventing Finance for Sustainability and Inclusion. And I believe we had some very interesting 2 days behind us with excellent and stimulating conversations on sustainable finance and financial inclusion. We discussed the vital role of governments and multilateral development banks in supporting sustainable, climate-resilient infrastructure development and crowding in the private sector. We learned about innovative use of green, blue, and climate financing instruments and business models. We discussed how smart regulatory and policy approaches can support financial inclusion, and we learned about new developments in sustainable finance and about innovations that drive financial inclusion. Now, on the last day of the AFF, we want to bring it all together. So as a follow-up to our intense discussions on various topics, we have prepared for you today 2 roundtables. And one of our goals for this forum is, and I would like to quote the Managing Director General of the ADB, Mr. Woo Chong-um, who mentioned in his opening remarks, he said, we need to integrate the principles of sustainable development as well as social and economic inclusion into financial decision-making. So I would like now to hand over to our moderator, Bruno Carrasco. He will focus today on prepping climate-resilient infrastructure and green recovery after COVID-19. Bruno is the Director General of the Sustainable Development and Climate Change Department at the ADB, and he leads ADB-wide knowledge and innovation work in all thematic and sector operation areas. He's also responsible for ensuring compliance with environmental and social safeguard policies. So he's the right man for the job. I hand over to you, Bruno. We are looking forward to 70 minutes interesting conversations with 4 very interesting guests.
Thank you so much, Jost. It's a pleasure to be here. Delighted to moderate this roundtable. I represent the Sustainable Development and Climate Change Department at ADB, as Jost has mentioned. And of course, the subject of this roundtable centers much on the work that we're doing to support our developing member countries to embark on a recovery path. Now, the recovery path for our DMCs will represent some very heavy lifting, recognizing that there have been important setbacks across many of our countries involving labor shedding, supply chain disruptions, weak public finances, increasing debt, and inflationary pressures. They also have felt increasing vulnerabilities to climate change, as well as many other challenges. There is a strong recognition that investing in infrastructure will remain critical for this region to continue the strong GDP growth paths prior to the pandemic and raise people out of poverty. We need to both mobilize more infrastructure investment, including from capital markets, and 2, we need to do more with every dollar of investment. In other words, we need to make sure that our infrastructure development can support a green, resilient, inclusive recovery. Now, for this session, we have 4 distinguished panelists, which I will now introduce. So we have Anna Sophia Herken from the Business Division Head of Alliance Asset Management. We're also pleased to have Dr. Nazruddin Joko Surjono, who's the head of the Regional Development Planning Board in Bapeda, Indonesia. We also have with us Petra Hill-Kemna, chairperson of the European Insurance and Occupational Pensions Authority. And we also have with us Steve Howard, who is the Chief Sustainability Officer at Temasek. We have arranged a number of questions for the panelists. And then at the very end, we will leave some 10 minutes for any questions from participants. So with that, we may turn now to our set of questions. So let me begin by saying that prepping infrastructure for climate change already seemed a monumental task even before 2020 when the pandemic hit. So my introductory question to all panelists is, how has COVID recovery effort changed your thinking on this? So let us start perhaps with Anna. Over to you, Anna. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the introduction and for the nice panel. So Yeah, basically, I mean, like pre-COVID or post-COVID, the issue of climate change has been with us for quite some long time. So I think the latest COVID pandemic has rather complicated the challenge. And it's estimated about 80% of current global emissions are somehow related to infrastructure. So I think this is sort of something that has shaped our perception, knowing that whatever we do now with regard to infrastructure will really have an impact on how and when we achieve net zero. At Allianz, we've had a climate change strategy since 2005, which we rigorously update and incorporate into our business. So pretty much linking climate change and infrastructure is not really new to us. And this is something we've also really put into focus before the pandemic. So I think what is new is sort of our perception and how we approach business more short-term and long-term, because with the pandemic and other global developments, you certainly see a certain impact on short-term sustainability approaches. Like we see supply chain shortages and other obstacles. So I think this is something that we really just look at carefully. But at the same time, we are very optimistic that the current situation and COVID and the global situation are putting more light on the urgency to act. So I think if you sort of ask what is changing, it's more that we are saying, okay, short term, we might see some backlash, but in the longer term, we are very much focused on the opportunities and urgency. And also one development that I noticed, which I think is quite nice, while we see all these challenges, obstacles, supply chain, rising energy prices, we have also sharpened our focus to looking more at the opportunities. So if you look at the investment need, and we actually commissioned a study where we just said, just by 2030, looking at investment need capex just for achieving net zero is about $40 trillion. And the largest part of it stems from infrastructure-related investment. And if you take aside the public sector financing, which is certainly a large part, we estimate that about $5 trillion are left as an opportunity space for asset managers. So this is also a change that we see. But on one hand, we're struggling a lot with the challenges, but at the same time, which seems a contradiction, but it's sort of nicely linked, we see a lot of opportunities. And the third observation that we have, and you mentioned it in your introduction, certainly, is that we know even more now, and we've done this even pre-COVID, how important it is to cooperate closely with governments and international organizations.
Thank you very much, Anna. Appreciate those points. The opportunities, but we need to recognize that mobilization of resources will bring in both public and private sector. With a lot of assets under management, there are opportunities across the board for financial institutions. Let me ask the same question then to our second speaker, Dr. Nasruddin. Dr. Nasruddin, over to you, please. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, moderator, Mr. Bruno. We have in Jakarta, actually, during COVID, the economic growth become minus 2.36. Before, the economic growth in Jakarta is 5.89% per year. So during COVID, the economic growth become lower, and also our fiscal capacity. Before COVID, our regional budget around 72 trillion rupiah, and during COVID become 91.5 trillion rupiah. So all of the budget and economic growth become, we have fiscal space become small compared with previous. And during COVID, we actually, COVID-19 pandemic is momentum to encourage the transition of economic activity to become more environmentally friendly. So public safety during COVID become our top list of priority in Jakarta. So this is an important thing that we have to overcome the COVID. And health issue, environment issue become the first top priority in Jakarta, because of we have changed our paradigm. Before we only see that, for example, a car-oriented development, and now we shift to transit-oriented development in transportation. So we promote like public transportation compared with previously that we are promote car or private Jakarta. And also, as an effort of encourage recovery from COVID-19 pandemic, Jakarta is going through challenging years. The main key that we do in realizing inclusive and participatory development is by setting up an innovation platform. We call it Jakarta Development Collaboration Network. So collaboration become an important issue during COVID. We realized that our capacity fiscal is not enough, but we need collaboration with the people in Jakarta. Through Jakarta Development Collaboration Network, Jakarta Province Government is involved in collaboration and co-creation with various parties outside the government to bring Jakarta to a sustainable, modern, prosperous, and climate resilient city. We have also a strong commitment to tackling climate change. In 2007, Jakarta has joined C40, which is committed to tackling the impact of climate change and global warming. In 2016, Jakarta issued Green Design, Green Building to reduce water, energy, CO2 emission in building with target 30% by 2030. And also we have agreement to build climate action plan that is in line with the Paris Agreement, that policy as well implementation timeline now until 2030 in order to achieve low carbon development by 2050. Its goal is to reinforce current climate activity, while also proposing new initiatives to help accelerate them. Jakarta, since 2009, has set a 30% greenhouse emission reduction. We have translated the target into sectoral target and action in 2012. We also commitment to restoring urban ecosystem through the improvement of the environmental quality index, which include the quality of water, seawater, and land through collaboration with various supporting sector, both sourced by regional budget, and also we collaborate with central government and other legitimate source of funding. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Nazruddin. Very, very interesting and across the board support for inclusive green recovery as we've seen it, prioritizing health and environment, but looking at such things as public-oriented transport. So very, very interesting set of points. I'd like now to turn to the next panelist, Ms. Hilkema.
Yes, good morning, everyone. I hope you can hear me well, and it's a pleasure to be here. I say good morning, it's morning for me, it's good evening for you, and I'm happy to contribute to this conference on this very important indeed monumental task that we have ahead, mammoth task, but I think we're still very much focusing on what needs to be done. And so when we look at where we are today, unfortunately, what we do have to take into consideration with all the challenges we already had is also the unprovoked invasion into Ukraine, which we now also have to deal with. Now, what does that mean with regard to our ambition to the blue and the green transition? And here what I would say is that on the one hand, it confirms even further our need and the urgency to move to renewable energy resources. At the same time, we also see that the challenges that we have on our way might be growing. And so what we could see is that since January, we already saw some macroeconomic conditions that were new in the sense of rising inflation and a lot of volatility. And so it was there, but it has been growing because of the invasion, and the risk of even higher inflation is still there, of course, and at least persistent inflation. Combined with that, the conflict, the complete ban of oil and gas imports from Russia that potentially could happen, and that could have an impact on economic activity. And as a result, and I think Anna also alluded to that, what we do see is that in the short run, there is here and there, depending on which country you are, a temporary revival of the reliance and investment in infrastructure that is not considered to really be helpful for climate change. At the same time, we do see that as a temporary measure in order to be able to still support the economy, while very much, and that is really underlying, while very much, and I would say even more embracing the need to continue with our ambition and our steps towards a net zero economy. Moreover, I think what we've seen, and let's not forget that, what we've seen that if we have to face as a world, COVID was a worldwide event, events like this, that measures that are unimaginable before actually become globally accepted. I think about distancing, I think about mask wearing, I think about remote working. Part of this will stay with us. It has learned us that there are different ways to actually continue with our activity. And I think this in itself shows that there are many opportunities to continue with transformative measures to support sustainable infrastructure investments and the green transition. And I'll stop there. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Petra. So in addition to the challenges, we have disruptions in markets, volatility from the Ukraine crisis, which is making, in some ways, this a little bit more challenging, and recognizing that there are trade-offs that may be different over the short term from the medium term. So much appreciate those points, Petra. Let us next turn to Stephen Howard. Steve, over to you, please.
Thanks, Bruno. I mean, just to build off, I agree with what the other panelists have said, particularly Petra's point just now of the fact that we've rewritten the rule book through the pandemic. I think also the role of government and its intervention to support the economy has just been extraordinary in that. I was concerned, in obviously not just about the immediate social and economic impacts of the pandemic, of whether we back off our climate commitments around the world, but you actually saw the opposite. And so we'd say net zero is the new normal now. If I just take Southeast Asia, 8 out of 10 countries have net zero commitments. You know, Indonesia's got a carbon tax. Singapore's got a carbon tax. So new measures are coming into place. So that we've got that there. I think the reality that climate change is like a pandemic that doesn't go away. It just gets worse. Until we get to net zero, it just gets worse, and that frames our mind. And I think then looking at the level of extreme weather that we've got now, that really makes this a pressing reality for people. I think South Asia, in April already temperatures hitting nearly 50 degrees centigrade this year. Many events. You can just look at them every day, daily extreme weather events now. We've looked at the long-term economics of this, and that there is the real risk of, if we don't get ahead of climate change, it can be a real break on economic growth. It could actually push certain regions into negative per capita GDP growth, which is the ultimate bad scenario for this. So it's all at risk at play. I think we've got the tailwind. So the tailwind has turned into a typhoon behind climate action. I think that's the positive thing. But the headwinds have also increased, as we've heard, due to the fragile state of the global economy that we now see. So we've got those two contravening forces. I think where we're going to find challenges, things that are marginal or are really hard to finance are even harder to finance today than they were even a few months ago, because of the global economy, because of pressure on interest rates, cost of capital, etc. And we're going to need to double down on that. We've set up together with HSBC a facility together with yourselves, a blended finance facility to do sustainable debt, to look at the infrastructure projects that actually they require more effort to actually provide the debt for. They're good projects, many of them in renewables across Southeast Asia. I think that we're going to need many more facilities and initiatives like that. On the good news is the technology is just getting better. So the solutions for green infrastructure are just getting better all the time. So we can now see, we've just done at the first trillion watts. I like this number, the first trillion watts of solar. It took 70 years to do the first trillion watts. We saw incredible price improvements and performance improvements, 90% price improvements in just the last 10 years, about 70 years. We're going to do the next trillion watts in just 4 years. So there is, as we look to energy security as well as climate resilience, there is no peak sun. You know, we've got 5 billion years of sun reserves. So the potential there. The same with wind, with hydro. And we can see options coming through like green hydrogen, which you'd say 2-3 years ago, there wasn't much focus. Now we can see, actually, we can get really, really good energy security and low-cost green hydrogen, which can decarbonize much of the rest of the economy that can't necessarily be reached by green electrons. Same thing with battery storage, electric vehicles. There's regional champions coming through as well in Asia that are developing at the forefront of technologies, from electric vehicles, battery storage, wind, solar. So I think we have to frame this in 2 ways. This is our best strategic economic development opportunity. This is not about doing something that's negative, or this is about energy security, job creation, reliable, incredibly cheap transport and clean energy. So it has to be seen as the race of our lives. And but you know, and am I confident? Well, I can see many good signs, but as I said, the tailwinds are stronger, but the headwinds are also blowing harder. So it's a challenging moment.
Thank you very much, Steve. Appreciate those points. Net zero is the new norm. We are facing some headwinds, but by and large, those tailwinds are looking stronger. We have tremendous opportunities to build on. We need to look at blended finance options, and I'm glad that you mentioned that debt platform that you were referring to, that we're working with you and others to bring in greater opportunities for infrastructure development on some of the more marginal cases. And that blended finance, I think, is part of the broader solution. Very good. So we started with Anna with opportunities, and we've ended with other opportunities from Steve. I'd like now to turn to the second set of questions, and that is now looking at more the practical side. And we want to get a little better of a feel for what are some of the best practices in creating that enabling environment. And here we're talking about such things as technology, which Steve referred to, finance, which you also referred to, and things like blue, green, climate finance investments. What are some of those best practices from where you sit? So let's go back to Anna on this. Thank you.
Thank you. So Allianz Group is a large infrastructure investor, so we have quite a long track record in doing infrastructure investment. At the same time, I just alluded that we had our first climate change strategy already in 2005, which was quite early. And since then, we really tried to make sure that with our climate change strategy, we try to understand and anticipate the risk as much as possible arising from climate change. So when we talk about infrastructure investment, we always try to understand sort of and build around like what can change over the past years due to climate change. And also what we see is we see an increased demand of very different types of infrastructure investment, protection walls, sea walls. So that's sort of something that has changed. But perhaps I can give you just like two small examples of what we've done lately. So in November last year, Allianz Global Investors, which is a really large leading active investment manager, together with the European Investment Bank, we launched a public-private partnership, which we call the Emerging Market Climate Action Strategy, together with the governments of Germany and Luxembourg, the Nordic Development Fund, and Volksam. So the resources of the funds are used to provide financial support to infrastructure and climate funds, which then finance greenfield climate adaptation and mitigation projects in non-OECD countries, in addition to other environmental projects. It has a target size of about 500 million euros. And we really aspire that this will be a European flagship impact investing initiative, which will mobilize hopefully a lot of substantial funding. And again, for us at Allianz side, since there are so many unforeseen risks, we're certainly very happy to do this together with the European Investment Bank. So that was one example. Just last month, Allianz Global Investors announced a diversified infrastructure equity fund, which classifies as Article 8 SFDR fund. So again, there's an investment approach which focuses very much on energy transition and sustainable finance. And then thirdly, as I just mentioned in the beginning, though we did not specify the concrete opportunities yet, we're really looking at all the investment and the CapEx need arising from net zero transition and really trying to break it down by sectors, by regions, and try to translate it into how we could play a role in that. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Anna. Appreciate those points. The ability to mobilize financing and be able, hopefully, to leverage it to support across other regions. Wonderful. Maybe I can ask you, Anna, just a follow-up question. Can you share some of the experiences with building climate resilient infrastructure and integrating this into post-COVID-19 recovery programs? Thank you.
Climate resilient is sort of, I think our focus at the moment is really rather looking at the impact that infrastructure has on net zero. Mm-hmm. So this is more sort of, we're trying to anticipate, so what is the impact when we finance infrastructure project? What is the impact on the net zero transition? So this is sort of, I think it's much more difficult to go into sort of the resilient part. So at the moment, like also the examples I cited, they have it as a part, but overall, it's sort of like more like the net zero transition umbrella. So the resilience part is just one of them.
Yeah, I understood.
Because you can't really sort of it's linked.
That's right. Yes. No. Certainly, a lot of work that is going now into adaptation and resilience from the kind of the focus on mitigation. We also appreciate, alluding to my opening remarks, making every dollar of infrastructure finance work better, and the agenda that we've seen under the G20 of the quality infrastructure investment also plays a part there. Thank you very much, Anna. Let me now go back to our panelist, Dr. Nasruddin, on the same question. Best practices on creating an enabling environment, building on technology and finance. What are your thoughts here? Over to you.
Okay, thank you. From Jakarta side, every activity or program will involve the community. And about related to green energy, one of the most essential policy to improve green energy-based production by energy diversification. We have island. Jakarta is not only mainland, but we have island. Jakarta, 1,000 island. So we develop solar power plant is operated with 400 kilowatt peak power. In addition, we realized that how transportation sector has been the dominant contributor for worsening the air quality. The Jakarta government focus on expanding more efficient and integrated modes of mobility with massive pedestrian way construction. So now we develop pedestrian way more and also building bike lane across the city, expanding MRT, BRT, and LRT network, plus transforming all our diesel buses to be electric buses. And we hope that this year's maybe around 100 electric buses will operate in Jakarta. And we implemented implementation of low emission zone in Jakarta. So part of the area in Jakarta, we implement of low emission zone. In the energy sector, the government has mainstreamed pedestrian and cyclists on the road, and we also encourage citizens to transition by using public transportation. In June, in this year's, Jakarta holding an event, a Formula or a Prix, the championship in Jakarta. We hope that this is socializing the green energy in Jakarta and also part of a campaign of electric car in Jakarta. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I like those points. Good examples. E-buses, that's something that we're also strongly supporting across many of our countries. The low emission zones in Jakarta, a very interesting point. And I think that brings to bear the importance of digital solutions in this whole recovery phase and the opportunities that opens. Wonderful. Let me now then turn to our next panelist to address this same question, and turn it now to Petra.
Yeah, thank you. And here, what I want to add to the discussion is how we, as supervisors, with a more an indirect role, but still, I think a role, are looking at how we can also support the industry in making this move that they do want to make. And I want to share a few of the examples of what we are currently doing. So first of all, based on the concept of double materiality, meaning on the asset side, be conscious not only of how climate change can impact you, and it can. We have just published 3 weeks ago a report on physical risks and a sensitivity analysis we've done with many contributions of many of the insurers in Europe, and it shows where currently the physical risks are for the insurers. However, if you look carefully, you also see where there are no physical risks for impact on insurers, but that can also mean that there is no insurance available. Hence, we also see slowly gaps. And I think here as supervisors, what we can do is we can support identifying where we are when it comes to the risks of physical risk, see to what extent it can be insured, but also to what extent it can be mitigated. The other part of double materiality, of course, is what is the impact of your investment on in infrastructure, etc. And here what we do see is also from a reputational societal perspective, sometimes a call to really just leave certain non-green investments. However, what we stress is that there could also be a very positive role, positive stewardship, if at least temporarily the insurance industry would stay in and pension funds would continue to invest, however, on the basis of transition plans that really are monitored on an annual basis and that show steps towards net zero. And I think here the impact of these two sectors that are very long-term investors are not recognized only by us as supervisors, but also very much by the European Commission, who really through the Capital Markets Union plan, but also through current changes in the regulatory frameworks, tries to create more space for long-term investments in facilitating the transition to green. And particularly when it comes to really long-term investment, I would say that also we as regulators do see room for some easing of capital requirements while still being prudent. Now, what I want to add to this is that, particularly when it comes to the insurance industry, there is a key role they can also play on the liability side, where they actually underwrite the risk. And here we have started work on impact underwriting, where we're first of all raising awareness of the fact that what you underwrite is also facilitating a business. And we also look at incentives for risk prevention, for mitigation to consumers, but also small businesses, maybe even big businesses, when you insure. We see several examples. It goes from building back better policies to really improvement in relation to, for example, building. We see it in how people are motivated to drive in a way that is more sustainable. So again, here through underwriting, the role of insurance, I think, cannot be underestimated. How then do you incentivize consumers? I think here, of course, risk premium will help, but I also think that more and more consumers want to know whether or not something is green. And here, I really believe that it will be helpful to, that transparency will help, and that the transparency will also help to identify where greenwashing is happening. This will be a key focus of supervisors to make sure that what is sold as green will be green. But I think that through this role as supervisors, and then through the role of industry, thinking about where they invest and what they underwrite, but also seeing the possibility to incentivize a transition when they do, I think that is a key role. And so I would say impact underwriting, dollar materiality are key parts that can support our society going forward to a net zero environment. Thank you.
Really, really good points, Petra. The importance of the insurance industry here. I think we can look at many opportunities. You've presented some examples, and certainly the supervisor has in some ways the ability to align incentives in ways that perhaps others can't do so easily. So much appreciated on that point. Let me ask the same question to Steve. Steve, over to you, please.
Yeah, I think it's a good question on the best practice side. I think for a long time we've looked at the sort of the green transition as there's a combination of a good government policy, incentives, regulation, and business innovation and investment. That's what gets us to where we need. And in this, so if you take the first thing, we've used a phrase in this sort of its sector for a long time: long, loud, and legal. So from a policy environment, you want to create, like it's very helpful to have things like carbon pricing coming through, have net zero targets, have shorter term targets, and then have more detailed regulations that you can invest against that give you some certainty in that. I think the other best practice is really looking forwards. I think that even investors tend to look at last year and the last 5 years to project forwards. The past is now a poor indicator of the future. So we have to look forwards, understand technology pathways. Like if you looked at hydrogen today, you would say it was extraordinarily expensive and you wouldn't invest in it. If you project forward, you think actually before 2030, hydrogen's likely to become economically viable at scale and very interesting. So you have to, whether that's from a policy perspective or as an investor, you have to look forwards and understand the technology. So understand the technology. Yeah. Fundamentally, you have to measure emissions everywhere. So as an investor with a diverse portfolio, I'm sure like colleagues on the call, we have to understand where the carbon emissions are. So it starts with measuring and make sure that our portfolio companies or funds we invest in measure it. You have to set the targets there. So we've set a target of halving portfolio emissions against 2010 levels by 2030. We know where all that carbon is. We're decarbonizing. We're working with portfolio companies. We're sharing best practice. It becomes a discipline. Pricing it, whether that's through emissions trading schemes or carbon pricing, carbon taxes, if you're on the government side, or as an investor or a business. So we have an internal carbon price, which we're just in the process of increasing. It's $42 a ton today. We're increasing it to around 100 or a little more by 2030. And we'll so constantly revising that carbon price upwards. And we use that to guide our investment decisions. So these are things that we can do. And then I think getting focused on the future we want to create and leaning in. So it's not just business as usual. I think it's critically important. And looking at radical collaborations where you don't have internal capabilities. Let's say we're not a direct investor into infrastructure in a big way. We don't invest generally we don't do renewables projects one by one. But we've partnered with Brookfield Global Transition Fund, which I think is $13-14 billion now at scale. Their focus, it's the Global Transition Fund, is how do you invest in large-scale renewables to transition particularly hard-to-abate sectors, utilities, steel, etc. How do we take the renewables to scale and decarbonize society with that? We've set up a fund called Decarbonization Partners, which this is a franchise. It's a new investment manager, which is a collaboration, a joint venture between ourselves and BlackRock. And there we've brought a global team together. There'll be third-party capital coming in. We've committed $600 million across 2 funds between ourselves and BlackRock. And there we'll be investing in the companies that can scale at speed, so the commercializable companies, late venture, early growth, that deliver carbon solutions that help us decarbonize. And that brings together our capabilities alongside BlackRock's. So this sort of radical collaboration, I would say, is another best practice. And Bruno, we already talked about the sustainable, the debt platform that we've developed with yourselves and HSBC. That's something we couldn't do by ourselves. I don't think you could do it by yourselves and HSBC couldn't, but together we can do something like that. So this is a time where we need those sort of partnerships.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Steve. I appreciate that radical collaboration. I'll keep that in mind. We certainly need to bring knowledge solutions, technology solutions, and financial solutions together. And I think that we certainly appreciate the role of collaboration. Where I sit, we have partnerships where we try to build the relative advantages of different contributors, whether it's financial institutions, whether it's insurance, whether it's technology firms. And that's, I think, what will get us past the line. I appreciate also your point on the internal carbon pricing and the incentives that will come out of that, and recognizing also the whole narrative on stranded assets. So appreciate those points. We can now go to the next set of questions. And here again, we're trying to look more on the incentives and how we can better incentivize market participants, the public sector, towards maintaining green, blue, and climate innovation. Innovation is part of the solutions to the net zero target. We recognize across our developing member countries, across Asia Pacific, on the energy side, for example, they clearly say that they want energy security, they want access to energy. That's still not guaranteed. But at the same time, we have to be able to ensure that that is moving towards a low carbon transition. And here technology will play a very important role, and we need to get those incentives right. So with that lead, let me now go back to Anna and hear your thoughts on how do we incentivize. Anna, over to you, please.
Yeah, thank you very much. Like when we really look at the net zero transition and what we did, when we sort of tried to sort of break down all the sectors and understand what will be needed, we end up talking about innovation immediately, because like in 10 years from now, like technology will sort of have developed significantly. This is why we sort of always try to sort of anticipate what kind of trends will we see, and innovation is a huge issue. We also look at innovation in the sustainability space, also in infrastructure, which certainly sort of makes it more difficult in infrastructure, since you already sort of need to look at the infrastructure funding gap. And then if you break it down to sustainability and innovation, it sort of narrows the pipeline. So if you would ask me like more on the wish list, certainly there are so many aspects, and many have been, like Petra mentioned, the transparency aspect. So that's huge for us. We're creating transparency on all levels, on reporting standards, on data, the data issue, the metrics that Steve mentioned, sort of better understanding the framework of, and really understanding the impact of what we do. How do we measure impact? Like all these, these are sort of the common buzzwords, but this is really what we struggle with. So I think working on this, and then also the radical collaboration that you mentioned, will be crucial, because we definitely understand that we want to contribute as a financial private sector partner, but there's so much more that we need to understand, and this can only be done in collaboration.
Thank you. Thank you very much. We certainly, on this side of where we sit, we recognize also institutions like ourselves can contribute to mobilizing greater private investment through the de-risking of our pipeline of projects. And that's an important area that I think we need to explore further to be able to get more of that private capital coming in to support many of our development projects that we face or that we have in our pipeline. Very good. Let me turn now again back to our second panelist to hear your views. So Dr. Nazruddin, over to you, please.
Yeah, in the midst of pressure and limited fiscal local budget, infrastructure development remains the government focus by exploring innovative sources of financing. One form of collaboration in infrastructure development is through the regional government and business entity cooperation scheme or PPPs. And some example of project in Jakarta being carried out under the PPP scheme is, for example, Jakarta Sewerage System Zone, LRT in Pulau Gebang, and management of digital services, Jakarta Smart City. And then the other, how to incentivize by increasing investment in new renewable energy. The central government of Indonesia also provided fiscal and non-fiscal incentive, including one of the fiscal incentive for new and renewable energy developers is tax allowance and also tax holiday for investor to get the credit facility. It depends on the how much they will invest. If they invest a lot, then the tax holiday become 100% of income tax reduction. There is one of the solution how to incentivize private sector and join to invest in Jakarta or Indonesia.
Thank you very much for highlighting those points. So use of PPPs, use of incentives through the tax regime, certainly important areas. We have a platform at ADB where we look at the other side of the coin of the livable city is the investable city, and looking at arrangements such as PPPs to get some greater involvement from the private sector in areas where we may not get a full private sector initiative in place. So very important stepping stones as we see it. Very good. So let me now turn to Petra on the same question.
Yes, thank you, Bruno. And I understand my connection is not ideal, but I'll try to speak up. I think that Steve really said some real true words with the radical cooperation. And I also very much agree with Anna when it comes to the need for transparency, which will be key moving forward. And I think what you see here is that there is, I think, a lot of readiness to be transparent. It's also a lot of work, let's be frank. It's a lot of work that needs to be done, and it has to be done in a time that many have to move, and this sometimes has challenges. Still, I'm very happy that with the SFDR, the Sustainable Finance Directive on reporting for the financial industry in the EU, we have made a start, and as of next year there will be reporting. I think this will very much help to be clear on where industry is, what is needed, what needs to be done. At the same time, of course, the challenge will be that other industries only a year later will start that reporting. Still, that should not be a reason. And I think this is something we also need to recognize, that sometimes we still have to start moving, even though not everything is perfect yet. I think in the same context, you could look at how, when developing the taxonomy, the EU has tried to deal with the discussion on nuclear and gas activities. Of course, that's a very political discussion. I only represent a supervisor, but from where I stand, what I see is that in that, again, not very easy discussion, there was a need to balance, on the one hand, the notion that you do want to move to green energy, and maybe not all energy used right now is where you want to be in the final stage. And at the same time, while you are changing, there is also a need for still an energy supply. So activities that are now sometimes included then, like gas and nuclear, are defined as transitional activities, activities that cannot yet be replaced by technologically and economically feasible low carbon alternatives, but they can contribute to climate change mitigation with a potential to play a major role in the transition itself. And I think that you can debate that, and there are many discussions, but I think this is a way that, at least within the context of regulation, transparency and reporting, the EU is trying to strike a balance between the need for energy also today and the need to transition to green. And I'll stop there.
Thank you very much, Petra. Appreciate again those points. Transparency, disclosure, reporting, the taxonomy of renewable energy. What does it imply? What can we still consider? Things like transition fuel, natural gas, nuclear. Also wanted to mention that at ADB, in terms of our transparency, we will be publishing our first TCFD report. Looking at better information sharing, transparency on the portfolio, looking at such things as the physical risks and transition risks. So this is very important to get the market in some ways better informed and looking at seizing more opportunities on investments. So appreciate that point. Let me turn to Steve on the same question. Over to you, Steve. Thank you.
Thanks, Bruno. I think the panel have covered a lot of this actually, and I probably answered this question almost myself, the previous question to some extent. But I think from our perspective as an investment firm, then it's about creating a shift. I think that realistically you want to refocus yourself. That's what you want to do, and using a range of tools to do that. So, and I mentioned measure everything, price it is important. We're aligning this with our incentives as an organisation. So our compensation will be partially dependent on our progress that we make here, and that focuses people's minds to do that when you make it part of compensation. And if you think of when you start to do that, we've also allocated carbon budgets to individual investment teams. So you have to operate within an ever-shrinking carbon budget. So when you set those frameworks right, but I think in some ways at a certain point they almost become unnecessary, because what you want to do is to say, okay, we understand the future is about the technologies and infrastructure and business models that are fully compatible with a net zero world. So we're transitioning our existing portfolio there. We're working in depth on that transition, and we're investing in the future for the new investments we make. And I think we, as a firm, we mostly made that shift today. So, but that's as a result of doing all of those things. This is also the soft thing that you cannot, get away from is it's a leadership agenda as well. So it is about leaders, managers, political leaders of keeping this on the agenda, keeping it part of the conversation, not backing away from it. And I think so. There's the soft things that we do, which is, the training, the education, the events like this, the leadership we show on a daily basis, that complements the other sorts of tools that we can bring to bear on this. But I think, as we hopefully let's say the biggest part of the transition to a net zero world is the transition in our minds ourselves. It's a mindset transition. I hope that we've nearly made that now.
I appreciate that point, Steve. We tend to certainly look at the change in mindset as part of that process that allows us to engage, to maybe assume sometimes more risks and recognize that we can all be agents of change, but there has to be that growth mindset, very, very important. And that brings up some of the key aspects of leadership that you mentioned. Very good. I'm aware that we've got still 7 minutes to the hour. That allows us for one last question before we open it up to the participants. So if I may ask you to be concise in your answers to this last question, and that is really about a little bit of gazing into our crystal ball. Fast forward, say in another 10 years' time, and now we look back and see whether we did seize the opportunities and succeeded towards a low carbon transition path, went ahead with more ambitious nationally determined contributions, or whether we possibly see that we were not up to the task, that we did not step up, and we lost on some of those opportunities. Bearing in mind the large spending spree that we had at our disposal in some ways, and whether we made the best of that investment into infrastructure and climate change. So let me hear your thoughts from all of you. Maybe let's change the order. Steve, if you want to go first on this one, thank you.
Thanks, Bruno. I said in my opening remarks, this is the race of our lives. It's climate change is an existential threat to us. I think we're now we're out of the starting blocks in the race. We understand where the finish line is, which we've defined as net zero. It could even be that we end up going net negative, and we probably will. So we're out of the starting blocks. We've not accelerated yet, but we are accelerating. And I think we'll see an extraordinary 10 years where we'll see radical decarbonisation, new businesses scaling, tremendous job creation in the green economy. But I think in all reality, Bruno, we'll still need to be accelerating further in 10 years' time.
Very good. Thank you for that. Let's now turn it to Petra. Your thoughts, Petra, gazing through your crystal ball.
Yeah, thank you. Well, I agree. We need to keep going. I like what was said about keeping this on the agenda. I truly hope that the next generation EU recovery plan in the EU is for its aiming at exactly emerging healthier, greener, and more digital from the pandemic, that we can keep that energy going. And I think that the title of this program, Next Generation EU, says a lot. It's for us to really think from the perspective of a next generation and how we want to leave the world to others. And that in itself, to me, is very motivating, but I find for many that is. And I think there is a whole new generation and in the world that really has a different perspective on what they want to see, how they want to live. And moreover, to the extent we have doubts, I think we are on a daily basis now confronted with news that reflects the impact of climate change. So I think we need to keep going. And I think failure is not an option. It is difficult. I am happy to say again that the cooperation that is mentioned many times is there. I think there really is more discussion on how we deal with the difficulties than whether or not we should move, and definitely also not if we need to keep pace. And we need to keep doing that because we need to start moving, and we need to keep moving very fast.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Petra. Dr. Nasruddin, very succinctly, please give me in 1 minute your thoughts.
Okay, the pandemic has evolved from a health hazard to a system-wide crisis, raising fundamental concerns about our community resilience because of the velocity with which it has impacted our economy. It has revealed pre-existing socio-economic imbalance and vulnerability. In general, pandemic had an impact on all sectors, including fiscal side. This includes funding for infrastructure for climate change mitigation and adaptation. Therefore, cities need to be innovative for other financing alternatives because the issue of climate change has become necessary for us to fulfill. And Jakarta has a strong commitment to tackling climate change. In 2020, Jakarta established climate task force as climate governance at a sub-national level. Although in near future there will be a recovery from fiscal side, financing for low carbon development and climate mitigation and adaptation effort must still be prioritized. For that, we open the widest possible financing option from any scheme. We realize the potential for climate disaster is real. For example, in Jakarta, in Java Island, there was a sea level rises. So it is necessary to accelerate the implementation of various climate change mitigation and adaptation programs. COVID-19 pandemic is a lesson learned. Jakarta will become a city that's resilient through innovation, and we will carry on upgrading and acceleration as a proof city, crisis resilient city, and digitally advanced city and sustainable livable city. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Appreciate those points. Now, finally, Anna, minute for you.
I can be very quick. So I agree with everything. And so just 2 points. I think the acceleration point is important because we've experienced some delay now with the pandemic and the invasion to Ukraine and all the terrible consequences. And on the other hand, I think there's so much optimism. If you look at the response, the international response to the pandemic situation and the sort of the unprecedented policymaker response, the financing, how we work together. So I would rather hope that we see urgency, we had a wake-up call, and on the other hand, that it sort of brought us together and that we will cooperate much more closely in the future.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you very much. So level of cautious optimism, if I can summarize, perhaps. All right, so now we've got a little less than 10 minutes for questions from the floor. We have received a number of questions. So let me start with a question to Steve. So Steve, does Temasek have any plans or perhaps interests to finance renewable energy projects in Indonesia? Also, does the pandemic situation become an obstacle to renewable energy funding? What renewable energy sectors do you focus on? Perhaps solar, wind, geothermal, or hydro? Thank you.
It's a great question. I appreciate that. And I'd firstly just take the point, I don't think the pandemic situation is an obstacle from our perspective on this. So I think we can keep that to one side. As I mentioned, we're not frequently a direct infrastructure investor in things like renewables, but we will do it through collaborative platforms like the debt platform I've mentioned, or the Brookfield Global Transition Fund. And we're also interested in large companies that operate in this space. That said, on the technology side, we're very interested in investing in the sort of, let's say, the next wave of alternative clean energy. And there, we've invested in an advanced next generation geothermal business that's very promising, that can do, I didn't realize that for every kilometer you go down, it gets about 40 degrees hotter. So you don't have to go that far down. You don't need full active lava systems or magma or things like this, incredible hot rocks. You can find in many places things. So there's an advanced geothermal company we've invested in. We've mapped the hydrogen. We've made several investments in hydrogen. I think hydrogen is very promising in what it can do in this space. And then looking at the wider implications of this, because as we look at clean energy, if we take a longer term perspective, we're going to have incredibly affordable, abundant clean energy this century. That's the good news. And it's decentralized, and it's a platform for lots of other industries. So we're also, as an investor, looking at what are the implications as clean energy rolls out for other sectors. Like you can see the full decarbonisation of transport, whether that's sustainable aviation fuel, the next generation marine shipping fuels, or it's electric vehicles for ground transportation. Sometimes we're investing into renewable energy, but we're really interested in technology development and the implications of it.
Thank you very much, Steve. I have another question. This is Anna and Petra, but perhaps more to you, Petra. Are insurance companies in Europe and North America influencing the globe's great energy transition differently?
Yes, thank you. I would say that, let me start with, are they influencing it? I think, and I said that already before, they have a role to play. And I'm very happy, particularly now with the new administration in the US, that we also as supervisors are working very closely together, monitoring what is happening in the market. We actually have an EU-US dialogue where 2 out of the 3 work streams are now fully focused on sustainability. Now, is there a difference? I think there is diversity that is really helpful in the sense that we, particularly in climate change, we do see that where you are in the world, it makes a difference on what kind of climate change impact you will see. Sometimes it's the same, but sometimes when it comes to hurricanes and tornadoes, there's a lot of experience in the US. And when it comes to other risks, we can share what we have seen, how we can deal with that, how we can prevent it and mitigate. Again, it becomes unaffordable if we do not mitigate, if we do not adapt, and if we do not incentivize to start adaptation. And I think by sharing those experiences, by the way, also through the International Organization of supervisors, with the members from Asia and elsewhere in the world. I think this is not so much differences, but it's a diversity that contributes to an overall picture on how we can move forward, and it's very helpful. And yes, insurers play a key role in this. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think I have a last question for Sujono. Given that Jakarta is yet to fully leverage its strong fiscal capacity to attract private sector financiers, are there any plans to leverage municipal budgets to mobilize private investment? Very good question.
Yeah, first of all, awareness of climate change must be understood by all stakeholders so that everyone can work on the same vision. It's not only the form of greenwashing practices, as I mentioned earlier, Mrs. Petra, but also holistic understanding that must be conveyed in a comprehensive and sustainable project as well. And Jakarta has, oh, sorry, this is a different question, but the question from, I read from one of the questions that about the city play vital role in the planning and investing of urban infrastructure because it is authority of the city over selecting the infrastructure project. This will determine the direction of development. Jakarta is committed to becoming greener and sustainable city. We have planning vision budget around 571 trillion rupiah for 10 years. So we have planned what the infrastructure we will build in the future, like clean water management, transportation management, flood control, waste and wastewater management, and housing provision for up to 600,000 units. However, we realize that financing alone, public sector financing alone is not sufficient. Therefore, it is necessary to mobilize private sector investment to fill the funding gap for many urban green infrastructure projects.
Okay, very good. Thank you very much. I've been told to wrap up. I know that there are some further questions. We may be able to get back to those who asked the questions. But let me conclude by thanking all the distinguished panelists. I think we had a great conversation. We addressed many of the points that we all have in our minds. How are we going to be able to address this transition that we're facing and do so successfully, bringing together that radical collaboration that Steve mentioned, bringing together the need for greater transparency, disclosure in our portfolios and our investment decisions, making sure that we have mechanisms and incentives to move the needle, as it were, making sure that we're able to attract the knowledge and know-how, bring in new technologies, and if we can bring all of that together, we are cautiously optimistic that the future will look brighter. So with that, let me thank all of the panelists. It was great to hear all of you. I wish we could have gone on. There's a lot more that I'm sure our participants would have been able to further elaborate on. But a big thanks to all of you, and turning it over now to you, Jos. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Bruno Carrasco, for moderating this very interesting session. I think we learned a lot about how to build sustainable infrastructure in Asia that is resilient to climate change impacts, and of course also how to incentivize our economies post-COVID, although for some of us, I think the pandemic is still a reality. So we are coming to the end of the first roundtable. Thanks again to our four panelists, Anna Herken, Pak Sujono, Peter Hilkemer, and Steve Howard, for sharing your thoughts and insights. And also thanks to our attendees who have joined in the session. And we would like to ask everybody on our screens to go to the feedback form, which is hidden next to a Q&A button. There is a feedback form, and we ask a minute of your time to give us feedback, how you rate the session. So our speakers can't see that, but everybody who's an attendee can see that feedback button. So please think about that and do that. It takes only 30 seconds, so we would highly appreciate that. Before we close, just a preview to our next session. This is Roundtable 1. We have one more roundtable for you. It's on innovating an inclusive and safe green future through policy. This will be moderated by the Chief Sector Officer of the SDCC, Sung Suk Ra. So we have 3 very interesting guests. You should not miss that. This will be an interesting session, how regulators and policymakers balance inclusive, innovative financial policies and regulations to support investment in innovative financial services, while ensuring at the same time safety and soundness and steps to a green restart for the economy. So I hope you have still time for us. It's another 75 minutes, and it will start at 2:45 Manila time. So you have to do the math if you are not on Manila time. So 2:45, a little bit more relaxed time for our European colleagues. So thank you very much also to Anna Herken and Petra Hilkema to join us at this early morning hour in Europe. And again, also for Pak Sujono, we congratulate you to the Jakarta Day today. We heard that today is Jakarta Day in Indonesia, and you're celebrating, I'm not 100% sure how many, 180 years or more of Jakarta. Maybe you have to correct me here, but it's a long time.
195.
195. Okay, so that's it for today. Thank you very much for joining in, and see you all in a short while, in about half an hour from now, for the final session of the Asia Finance Forum. Thank you so much.